Have you ever been in a situation where you're completely alone and suddenly you realize that you're being watched by someone or something and you have no idea who it is? What would you do in that moment? Would you freeze or would you fight back? Emily stood frozen in the middle of the woods, her breath coming out in sharp, panicked gasps. She could hear the wind rustling through the trees, and the only other sound was her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The forest was so thick, the canopy overhead blocking out most of the light, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. She felt so small, so insignificant, like a speck in a place that didn't care whether she lived or died. She glanced down at the worn-out backpack slung over her shoulder, the only thing she had left from her trip, if you could even call it that. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This was supposed to be a fun camping trip with her mom. It was supposed to be a chance for them to bond, maybe even fix the broken pieces of their relationship that had been deteriorating for months now. But instead, it had turned into something far darker, something far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. It had started out innocently enough. A few days ago, they had packed their bags and driven up into the mountains for a much-needed escape. Emily hadn't even realized how much she was looking forward to it until they arrived. The beauty of the forest, the fresh air, it all felt so far removed from the chaos of her everyday life. But the chaos followed her here. The tension between her and her mother had been building up for weeks. Ever since Emily turned 16, her mom had been more controlling, more suffocating. It was as if every move Emily made, every breath she took, was under constant scrutiny. It wasn't always like this. She used to be able to talk to her mom, confide in her, but now it felt like nothing she did was ever good enough. Her mom's protective instincts had crossed a line, and it left Emily feeling like a prisoner in her own home. The argument had been inevitable. They were sitting around the campfire, Emily poking at the flames with a stick, her mom sitting across from her, watching her like a hawk. Emily could feel the familiar tension building in the air, thickening the atmosphere until it became unbearable. Her mom had started in again about how Emily wasn't taking life seriously enough, how she wasn't prepared for the future, how she needed to start thinking about college, about everything. It was always the same thing. Emily had enough. Mom, I get it. You think I'm lazy. You think I don't care. But you're wrong. I don't need you to control me anymore. Her voice had cracked with the weight of it all. I'm not a kid anymore. I need space. Her mom's face hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. You think I'm controlling you? I'm just trying to keep you safe. You don't understand the world yet, Emily. You're not ready to face it. Emily shook her head, her chest tightening. I'm ready. I'm so tired of you treating me like I'm some kind of child. That's when her mom did the unthinkable. In one swift motion, she stood up, turned her back on Emily, and without a word, walked off into the woods. Emily called out, but the only answer was the echo of her own voice bouncing back at her, swallowed up by the trees. It was a gut-wrenching moment, a moment where Emily realized that her mother wasn't just mad, she was leaving her. Alone. In the middle of nowhere. At first, Emily had tried to remain calm. She'll come back. She's just upset, she kept telling herself, but the hours passed, and there was no sign of her. Her mother's disappearance was no longer a fit of anger, it was something darker. She had left, and Emily was stranded in the forest, with nothing but the wild, the trees, and the haunting silence for company. The wind picked up again, this time carrying with it the unsettling sound of something moving through the brush behind her. Emily froze. Her skin prickled, her heart skipping a beat. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the sound was deliberate, steady. Something was moving closer, following her every step. Her breath caught in her throat. Was it her mom? Had she come back? No, it couldn't be. She had seen the way her mother had stormed off, and this felt different. This wasn't her mom. This felt wrong. Emily's body tensed as she instinctively looked around, her eyes scanning the woods. The trees were thick and the underbrush was heavy, making it difficult to see very far. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, creating an atmosphere that felt oppressive, claustrophobic. She took a tentative step forward, but then she stopped. Was that a shadow moving behind the tree? Her heart raced, and her instincts screamed at her to run. But where? There was nowhere to go. The forest stretched on in every direction, a maze of towering trees and tangled undergrowth. She couldn't even remember which way she had come from. She was lost, completely and utterly lost. Then, she heard it again. A faint rustling, followed by the snap of a twig. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her limbs trembling with fear. She knew someone was there. She wasn't imagining it. And then, she saw it, a figure, standing just beyond the trees, barely visible but unmistakable. "Mom," she called out, her voice trembling. But the figure didn't respond. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching her. A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine. It wasn't her mom. It wasn't anyone she knew. It was someone else, someone who had been watching her from the shadows this whole time. Her breath hitched in her throat. The fear bubbled up from deep inside her, choking her. She took a step back, but the figure remained still, its presence a silent, terrifying reminder that she was not alone. In the back of her mind, Emily remembered something her mom had once told her. If you ever feel like you're being watched, you probably are. But this was worse. This wasn't just a feeling anymore. This was real. And she had no idea what to do. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," she whispered to herself, as if repeating the words might somehow give her the strength to move forward, to fight back against the overwhelming fear. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily knew the answer now. The only thing that could push her forward was survival. She had to survive no matter who or what was watching. She turned and started running, her breath ragged in her chest, every footstep echoing in the eerie silence of the forest. But she knew one thing for sure. Someone was watching her, and they weren't going to let her go easily. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily ran without thinking, her feet pounding against the uneven ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the trees, but she could feel that ominous presence behind her, like a shadow trailing just out of reach, always there, always watching. Her mind raced, and for a moment, her thoughts spiraled back to the life she had left behind before she'd ended up here, before her mom had stormed off, leaving her stranded in the woods. It seemed like such a distant memory now, but everything that had led to this moment flashed before her eyes. She remembered the day she'd arrived home from school a few months ago, her heart light from a good day, only to find her mother sitting in the living room, her face tight with worry. She had been a shell of the woman Emily used to know. "Mom? What's going on?" Emily had asked, setting her backpack down and walking toward her. Her mom had turned to her, eyes tired, as though she hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk, Emily," she'd said, her voice strained. "I've been thinking about things, about us. About how I've been handling everything." Emily had frowned, not understanding what her mom meant. "What are you talking about?" Her mom hesitated, then spoke with an air of finality. "I've been overprotective. Too much. I've been trying to control you, and it's not healthy. But I can't help it. I'm scared, Emily." Scared? What did she mean? Emily had only been confused, unsure of what was going on in her mom's head. Her mom's gaze softened as she continued. "Your father's absence. It's been hard for both of us. You don't know what it was like, Emily. He left, and I've been trying to keep us afloat. But sometimes, I just feel like I'm losing control. Her father. The man who had vanished from their lives when Emily was just a toddler. Her mom never talked about him, she never wanted to. She always said he was a part of their past, a ghost who didn't deserve to be remembered. But Emily could never forget the hollow, empty look in her mom's eyes whenever his name was even whispered. It was only years later, as Emily got older, that she realized just how deeply the abandonment had affected her mom. She had never fully processed it, and instead, she had buried herself in Emily, in their small home, in their quiet, predictable life. "I'm not a child anymore, Mom," Emily had said, her voice a little too sharp. "I can take care of myself." Her mother had flinched at the words, but she'd smiled weakly. "I know you can. But that's the thing, Emily. You're growing up too fast. I'm just trying to protect you. I don't want you to end up like me." Emily had no idea what her mom meant by that, but there was something in her eyes, a deep, unresolved pain, that sent a chill down her spine. Her mother had always been protective, but lately, it had turned into something more suffocating. She'd started hovering over every decision Emily made, trying to control her every move, every thought, every dream. It wasn't just about safety. It was about fear. A fear that had been growing inside her mom ever since Emily was old enough to understand how much the world could hurt. That night, when they'd arrived in the forest, Emily had hoped that maybe this trip would change things. Maybe the isolation of the mountains would help them reconnect. Maybe they could talk through their issues and come to an understanding. Maybe her mom would finally see that she was no longer a little girl who needed constant protection. But she was wrong. The argument had spiraled out of control so quickly. It felt like everything they'd built up over the years, the walls between them, the misunderstandings, the resentments, had come crashing down in a single moment. Emily had been so desperate to prove herself, to show her mom she was capable of taking care of herself, but all she'd done was push her further away. And now, here she was alone in the woods, with her mother nowhere in sight. Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm her mind. She needed to focus, to find a way out. She couldn't afford to let her emotions control her anymore. Her mother had left, but that didn't mean she was entirely alone. She had herself. But that wasn't the only thing she had. She shook her head, forcing herself to clear away the images of the past. There was something else, something that felt even more pressing than the memory of her mother's face in the living room or the echo of their argument. The presence. The one that had been following her since she had first heard those strange noises. The one that was still out there, somewhere, hidden in the shadows, just beyond her reach. Emily looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. The sun was beginning to set, and the shadows in the forest grew longer, deeper. The wind rustled the leaves, and the eerie silence pressed in on her from every direction. She could feel eyes on her, though she couldn't see anyone. She wasn't just imagining it. She knew, deep down, that someone or something was watching her every move. It wasn't just the woods that were dangerous. Someone was out there. Someone who knew where she was, knew what she was doing, and Emily didn't know if she could trust them. She didn't know if they would help her or if they had worse intentions. Her pace quickened as she pushed through the underbrush, her thoughts swirling in every direction. She was starting to panic now, the adrenaline kicking in. How long had she been running? How far had she gone? It felt like hours, but she knew it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. The forest all looked the same, dense and impenetrable. She didn't know what to do. What if she was making a huge mistake? What if she was running straight into the path of someone more dangerous than she could ever imagine? But there was no turning back now. Suddenly, Emily heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. They were slow at first, deliberate, and then louder. Faster. She whipped her head around, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure was there again, just a few feet away, closer than before. The sun's fading light barely illuminated their features, but the shape was unmistakable. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, standing still, watching her. "Who are you?" Emily shouted, her voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his movements slow and calculated. Emily's blood ran cold. "Run," the man finally said, his voice a low rasp. For a moment, Emily just stood there, frozen. Her mind screamed for her to run, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from him. She couldn't understand why he was helping her, or if he was helping her at all. But before she could make a decision, he spoke again. "Run," he repeated, louder this time. "They're coming." And just like that, Emily knew she had no choice. She turned and sprinted into the woods, not looking back, knowing that whatever was waiting for her in the darkness was far worse than the stranger who had come to her aid. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy of trees, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to dance across the forest floor. Emily's breath was heavy, each step more labored than the last as she pushed herself deeper into the woods. The man's warning echoed in her mind like a drumbeat, making her pulse race even faster. "They're coming." Who were they? The forest was eerily silent, aside from her panicked footfalls. There were no animals scurrying in the underbrush, no distant calls from owls or coyotes, nothing except the oppressive stillness that seemed to close in around her with every passing moment. Emily had no idea what to expect. She didn't know if she was running from some dangerous predator or if the man who had spoken to her had been a figment of her imagination, his cryptic warning nothing more than a trick of the mind. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing but trees, the space behind her swallowed by the darkness. "Focus. Keep moving." Her heart hammered in her chest, the adrenaline surging through her veins as she stumbled over rocks and roots, barely able to keep her footing in the thickening darkness. She couldn't afford to stop, couldn't afford to look back. But the whispering fear gnawed at her. The man, why had he helped her? Why had he warned her? Was it really out of kindness, or was there something more sinister at play? Another sound broke the silence. A snap of a twig, a rustle in the bushes. Emily froze, her eyes darting around wildly, scanning the area. She didn't know if it was a wild animal or if someone was following her. Her instincts screamed that she wasn't alone. Her breath quickened as she crouched low, trying to make herself as small as possible. The sound grew louder, closer. Another rustle, followed by a faint grunt. Emily held her breath, not daring to make a sound. She could see nothing in the darkness, but she could feel the weight of eyes upon her. Her entire body was tense, ready to spring into action at any moment. "I need to find shelter. Somewhere I can hide." Her mind raced, searching for a way to escape whatever was out there. She spotted a cluster of thick bushes ahead, their leaves heavy with moisture. Without thinking, she made a beeline for them, crouching behind the dense foliage, her heart still pounding in her chest. Minutes passed, each one dragging like an eternity. The sounds had stopped, but Emily wasn't sure if that was a relief or if it was worse. The silence felt so wrong. Too still. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she waited, hoping for something to break the tension. And then, a voice. It was soft at first, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a knife. "You can't hide from them." Emily's body jerked in surprise, and her heart nearly leapt out of her chest. She looked around frantically, but there was no one. The voice wasn't a sound, it was a presence. A vibration in the air that was more felt than heard. The words hung in the air like a warning, and a deep, primal fear crawled up her spine. She glanced nervously around her, trying to find the source, but all she could see were the thick shadows of the trees, stretching long and dark under the dim light of the moon. The voice came again, this time louder, clearer, and more commanding. "Run." Before Emily could react, she felt something, a pressure, a presence, press against her chest, like the air itself was suffocating her. The shadows around her seemed to move, swirling like living things, growing thicker and darker. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and a low, guttural growl rumbled through the earth. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was pure terror. She was no longer alone in the woods. Some force, was coming for her. And it wasn't human. Her pulse quickened, the pounding of her heart now the only thing she could hear. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but her body refused to move. Her muscles were locked in place, paralyzed by the overwhelming sensation of being hunted. A shadow darted past her, so fast that she barely caught a glimpse of it. It was a figure, tall and thin, with limbs that moved in unnatural angles. It was there, and then it was gone, like a fleeting thought, just out of reach. Emily's breath came in sharp gasps as she scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She couldn't stay here. She had to keep moving. But where? There was no clear path. The woods stretched endlessly in every direction, a maze of trees and thick underbrush, all of it closing in around her. She was running blind, but she had no choice. The forest had become a labyrinth, and every corner she turned only seemed to lead her deeper into the heart of it. A distant howl pierced the air, sending a jolt of fear straight to her core. It was a wolf's cry, but something about it was wrong. Too low, too guttural, almost like the sound of a creature not of this world. Emily's legs burned as she sprinted through the darkness, pushing herself harder than she ever thought she could. She had no idea where she was going, no idea what was chasing her, but every fiber of her being screamed for her to run. The darkness seemed to grow thicker with every passing moment. The trees towered above her like looming giants, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The wind howled, whipping her hair and stinging her face as she barreled forward. I can't keep going like this. I can't outrun them forever. Her mind was a blur of panic and fear. She had to find a way out, had to find her mother. The thought of her mom, of the bond they had once shared, pushed Emily forward even when every instinct told her to stop. She had to find a way to survive, to escape whatever force was hunting her. And then, just as she thought she might collapse from exhaustion, she spotted it, through the trees, faintly illuminated by the moonlight, a cabin. It was small, dilapidated, and looked like it had been abandoned for years, but it was shelter. It was something. Without hesitation, Emily made a beeline for the cabin, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her legs screamed in protest, but she ignored it. She needed to get inside, to find some kind of safety, something to protect her from whatever was out there in the woods. As she approached the cabin, she felt a sudden sense of unease, a strange sense that the place was watching her, waiting for her. It wasn't just the fear that gripped her. It was the undeniable feeling that she wasn't alone. She reached the door, her hand trembling as she grasped the handle, but before she could turn it, the growl echoed again, closer this time, much closer. Something was on her heels, and Emily realized, with a chilling certainty, that whatever was out there wasn't just a shadow in the woods. It was something far darker, something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. With a trembling hand, she pushed open the door and stepped inside, the eerie howl of whatever was hunting her still reverberating in her ears. But even as the door closed behind her, she knew this was just the beginning. The moment the door slammed shut behind her, Emily's breath hitched, her heart thundering in her chest. She leaned against it, the rough wood biting into her back as she fought to steady her racing pulse. The silence in the cabin was almost suffocating, a thick, unnatural quiet that made her feel even more exposed. Her eyes scanned the dim interior. The cabin was small, with cracked wooden beams overhead and dust drifting in the pale moonlight filtering through the gaps in the walls. The furniture was sparse, just an old wooden chair in the corner, a table that looked like it hadn't seen use in years, and a few scattered crates that might have once held supplies. The floor was creaky underfoot, the boards warped and uneven, and the air smelled stale, as though the cabin had been abandoned long before Emily had arrived. She could still hear the growl in her mind, the rumbling that had come from just outside the door, too close for comfort. Whatever it wasn't human. The sound was too low, too guttural, almost like an animal, but not any animal she recognized. Her skin crawled at the thought, and a chill settled deep in her bones. "Get a grip, Emily," she told herself, forcing her trembling hands to steady. "You're safe for now. You just need to think." She moved further into the cabin, her eyes darting nervously around. The windows were boarded up, which made her feel trapped. There was no way to see what was going on outside, no way to watch for whatever had been following her. Emily tried to focus, but her thoughts were scattered. She was exhausted, mentally and physically. The long run through the woods, the fear, the constant sense of being hunted, it was all wearing her down. She needed to rest, but something told her that the moment she let her guard down, whatever was out there would be right on top of her. A sudden noise jolted her from her thoughts, a scraping sound, like metal against wood. She froze, her blood running cold. It came from the far corner of the room, just beyond a broken-down door that led to what seemed like a storage closet. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, her eyes locked on the closet. The scraping sound continued for a few moments, followed by a low, rhythmic thumping. It was as if something or someone was pacing behind that door, waiting, watching. "You have to check. You can't just sit here." With a shaky breath, Emily forced her legs to move. She took slow, cautious steps toward the closet, every creak of the floorboards amplifying in the heavy silence. The scraping sound was louder now, more frantic, and it sent a wave of dread through her chest. It was as if whatever was behind that door was trying to break free. She reached the door and hesitated, her hand hovering just above the rusty knob. She didn't know what was waiting for her on the other side. It could be a person, an animal, or something much worse. But she had no choice. The fear of the unknown outside was worse than whatever was behind the door. With a quick motion, she twisted the knob and yanked the door open, bracing herself for whatever would come. Nothing. The closet was empty. Emily stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her throat as she stared into the dark, dusty space. It was filled with old crates, bags, and bits of broken furniture. But there was no sign of whatever had been making that sound. Was I hearing things? But no, she knew she hadn't imagined it. That sound had been real. It had been wrong. Something had been behind that door. It wasn't just the wind or some animal. There was something else in the cabin with her, something she couldn't see. Emily stepped back, her pulse still racing, her eyes flicking nervously from the closet to the rest of the room. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even though she couldn't pinpoint where the threat was coming from. The atmosphere in the cabin was too thick, too oppressive. She needed answers. She needed to know what was going on. Who or what had been following her? What was in this cabin with her? Suddenly, a thought struck her, and she realized with a start that she hadn't seen the man since she'd entered the cabin. The one who had warned her. Where had he gone? He couldn't have just disappeared. Had he followed her in? Emily quickly moved toward the window, though she knew there was nothing to see through the boarded-up panes. Still, she needed to confirm that the cabin was empty. She pressed her ear against the wood, listening intently for any sound that could indicate someone or something was outside. A sudden crash echoed from somewhere in the distance. Emily jumped, spinning around to face the sound. Her heart dropped as she realized the noise hadn't come from outside the cabin, it had come from upstairs. The attic. Her body froze, dread seizing her chest. The sound was unmistakable. Footsteps. Light, deliberate steps, like someone or something was walking around up there. But there's no one else here. Is there? The footsteps grew louder, closer, and Emily's heart raced. They weren't the same as the growl she had heard earlier. They were more deliberate, more human, but just as unsettling. Without thinking, she turned and rushed toward the narrow staircase leading to the attic. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but she pushed herself upward, her breath shallow, her mind racing. She had to know who or what was up there. She had to confront it, because whatever it wasn't going to stop until it found her. At the top of the stairs, Emily hesitated, her hand on the doorframe to the attic. She could hear the footsteps clearly now, faint but distinct, like someone shifting their weight back and forth across the floor above. There was no turning back. With a swift motion, she pushed open the door to the attic. The room was dimly lit by the same pale moonlight that filtered in through a small, cracked window. It was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and piles of discarded items. But what struck Emily immediately was the thick layer of dust covering everything. No one had been up here in a long time. And yet, the footsteps had been real. She stepped cautiously into the attic, her senses on high alert. Every movement felt amplified in the quiet, every creak of the floorboards sending a spike of adrenaline through her veins. She scanned the room, every shadow seeming to hide something, but there was no one in sight. Then, her eyes fell on a strange object at the far end of the room. It was a large, old mirror, its frame ornate and cracked, the glass warped and cloudy with age. The reflection was faint, distorted, but as she stared at it, a chill swept over her, and her breath caught in her throat. Something was moving in the mirror. A figure. It was only a blur at first, but as Emily stepped closer, the image became clearer. It was her. But not quite. The woman in the mirror looked like her, but her eyes were empty, hollow, as if something dark was lurking behind them. The figure raised a hand, and Emily froze, her blood turning to ice. It was a mirror image of her, but it wasn't her. The figure in the mirror smiled. Emily's heart stopped. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't alone in this cabin after all. The thing watching her wasn't from outside. It had been here all along. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the figure in the mirror. Her body went rigid, the blood draining from her face as she took an instinctual step backward. But the figure in the reflection didn't move with her. It stayed frozen, watching her, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. The smile was the most disturbing part. It wasn't a kind, reassuring smile. It was a grin that seemed to stretch unnaturally wide, too wide, and Emily could feel the terror creeping up her spine. This isn't real. Her mind screamed at her to look away, to break the trance. But her body refused to obey. The figure in the mirror lifted its hand again, slowly, deliberately, until it was mirroring her own raised hand, moving just slightly out of sync, as though it were mocking her every movement. No. No. This is not happening. She wanted to scream, to break the spell, but no sound escaped her lips. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing against her chest as if the very air was thickening. Her heart pounded in her ears, a cacophony of fear that drowned out everything else. With shaking hands, Emily reached out toward the mirror, desperate to break the connection. Her fingers brushed against the cold, cracked glass, and for a moment, she felt a strange pull, a sensation like something was tugging her forward, drawing her into the reflection. The warmth of her touch was swallowed by the ice of the mirror, and for a fleeting instant, she thought she could feel something cold and clammy pressing against her fingertips from the other side. I need to get out of here. Her instincts screamed louder now. She jerked her hand back, and this time, the reflection mimicked her exactly, its hand pulling away with the same force. Emily stumbled back, her feet tangling in the attic's clutter. She had to get away. She had to escape whatever this thing was before it consumed her. But as she turned to flee, something caught her eye, another reflection in the shattered glass. A flicker of movement in the corner, a shadow that wasn't hers. It was tall, slender, and as it passed in the mirror, it vanished into the darkness of the attic. A figure, tall and hunched, crouching as if it were watching her every move. Her breath caught in her chest. What was that? The world around her seemed to distort, like she was sinking into a nightmare. She stumbled backward, her mind spinning, but she couldn't take her eyes off the mirror. She couldn't stop looking at the reflection of herself, standing there, waiting. This isn't real, she tried to tell herself again. It's just a trick of the mind. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just a trick. There was something malevolent at play here. Something dark and ancient, something that had been lying in wait in the depths of the forest, and now it had found her. Emily's heart pounded louder, and she finally tore her eyes away from the mirror. She needed to leave. There was no other option. The cabin, the woods, everything, it was all part of something bigger, something far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. With trembling hands, she turned to the staircase and bolted down the rickety stairs. Her legs burned as she flew through the cabin, rushing toward the door she had slammed shut earlier. The growl, the footsteps, the strange figure, everything felt like it was closing in on her, the walls of reality slipping away. She yanked open the door, rushing into the cold night air, not bothering to look back. The forest stretched out before her, dark and endless, but at least the oppressive atmosphere of the cabin was behind her now. The silence of the woods was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of some unknown creature. Her breath was ragged, her pulse thundering in her ears, but she couldn't stop. She needed to keep moving. And yet, as she stumbled through the underbrush, her thoughts kept drifting back to the mirror, to the figure that wasn't her, to the voice that had whispered in her mind. You can't hide from them. Who was they? Who was hunting her? She pushed forward, barely noticing the thickening woods around her. The path was unclear now, the trees growing denser and more twisted. But Emily didn't care. She had to get away, to escape whatever was hunting her in the dark. And then, just when she thought she might collapse from exhaustion, she saw it, a flicker of light through the trees. A cabin. Not again. She stopped dead in her tracks, her heart racing. No, it couldn't be the same cabin. She had left it, hadn't she? But as she approached, she realized with a sinking feeling that it was the same one. The same door, the same broken windows, the same eerie structure. Her stomach twisted with nausea. She had been running in circles. How? The light was coming from a lantern on the porch, casting long shadows across the yard. It flickered in the wind, like it was waiting for her. She could feel it, the same oppressive force from before. Her instincts screamed at her to run in the other direction, to get as far away from this cursed place as possible. But before she could make a move, she heard something that froze her in place, a voice, low and gravelly, calling out her name. Emily. She whipped around, her pulse spiking in terror, but there was no one there. Just the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. Emily. The voice again. Closer this time. It was coming from inside the cabin. The door creaked open slowly, like it was inviting her in. Something shifted in Emily's gut. She didn't know what it was. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a strange, unsettling pull, like the cabin was calling to her, drawing her in. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The figure in the mirror. It wasn't just a trick. It wasn't just a reflection. It was her, and she was being hunted. For a long moment, Emily stood frozen, torn between the urge to run and the pull toward the cabin. But something deep inside her told her that if she didn't enter that cabin, if she didn't confront whatever was waiting for her, the darkness would never let her go. She had no choice. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her feet moving on their own. The door closed behind her with an eerie finality, and the cabin swallowed her whole. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as she stepped over the threshold of the cabin once more. The door creaked behind her, the familiar sound echoing in the eerie silence. The air inside was colder than she remembered, the atmosphere thick with an oppressive energy that made her skin crawl. The shadows inside stretched unnaturally long, like they were reaching toward her. She hesitated, her breath shallow, unsure of whether she had made a grave mistake by coming back. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around and run, to leave the cabin behind and never look back. But she couldn't. Something inside of her, something deep and primal, told her that she had to face whatever was inside, whatever had been watching her, or she would never escape this nightmare. The door slammed shut behind her, and she flinched, the sound sharp and final. The silence returned, thick and unyielding, as though the cabin was holding its breath, waiting for something. Emily, the voice low and gravelly, drifted through the room again. It sent a shiver down her spine. The voice wasn't her mother's. It wasn't the man who had warned her. It was something else entirely, a deep, guttural voice that seemed to come from nowhere, from every direction at once. Emily's heart raced as she turned in a slow circle, scanning the room for any sign of the source of the voice. The same old furniture stood before her, the same dust-covered chairs and cracked wooden beams. The moonlight still filtered in through the gaps in the boarded-up windows, casting faint shadows on the walls. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different, wrong even. She stepped forward, her feet making soft, hesitant noises on the creaky floorboards. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, every fiber of her being screaming for her to leave. But she couldn't. Something in her gut told her that if she didn't face whatever was calling to her, she would be trapped here forever. She reached the center of the room, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling in the cold, empty cabin. She didn't expect an answer, but the words felt like a way to break the suffocating silence. The voice spoke again, this time closer, as if it were right behind her. "You can never leave." Emily's blood ran cold. The air seemed to grow thicker, pressing in on her from all sides. She spun around, searching the shadows for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. Only the darkness. "Show yourself," she demanded, her voice rising with a mix of fear and frustration. Her heart was pounding so loudly now she could hardly hear her own words. There was a rustling sound from above, a soft scrape of movement. Emily froze, her eyes snapping upward toward the ceiling. From the attic, the soft creak of something shifting, something moving, alive. She had to go up there. The answer was up there, she knew it. But every bone in her body screamed at her not to go. Still, she couldn't ignore the pull. The attic had been where she first encountered that reflection, the twisted version of herself that had smiled at her from the glass. She needed answers. And she had no choice but to face whatever was waiting for her up there. Her legs felt like lead as she turned toward the stairs. Every step seemed louder than the last, each creak of the floorboards beneath her feet ringing in her ears. The closer she got to the stairs, the heavier the air seemed to become. It felt like she was walking through molasses, her movements sluggish and labored, as though the very cabin was trying to hold her back. At the top of the stairs, Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the attic door. The wood felt cold under her fingertips, and she hesitated before pushing it open. The darkness beyond the door was suffocating, the air stale with the scent of dust and decay. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as she stepped over the threshold and into the attic. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, protesting her every step. The lanterns that had once flickered in the night were now long extinguished, and the room was bathed only in the faint light of the moon filtering through a small, cracked window. Shadows stretched long across the cluttered space, twisting and shifting in ways that seemed unnatural. The same old furniture and forgotten belongings still filled the attic, but now they felt like they were hiding something that wasn't there before. She could feel it, a presence in the room, something lurking just beyond her line of sight. There was a strange stillness in the air, as if the very space was holding its breath, waiting. Emily could hear the faintest rustle in the corner of the attic, the sound of someone, moving. The noise was almost imperceptible, but it was there, like the breath of something waiting for its moment. Is it the thing from the mirror? Her stomach twisted at the thought. She forced herself to move, her legs trembling with every step. The attic seemed to stretch on forever, an endless void of forgotten memories and untold secrets. And then, there it was, a figure. It was hard to make out at first, cloaked in shadows, its form too indistinct to fully comprehend. But as her eyes adjusted, she could see it more clearly, a tall, slender silhouette crouched low against the far wall of the attic. It was watching her, unmoving. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't speak. It didn't move. It just watched. And Emily could feel its eyes on her, cold, calculating, predatory. Her pulse raced as her gaze locked with the figure's. There was something familiar about it, something wrong. The longer she stared, the more she realized that the shape was too familiar. It was the same twisted reflection she had seen in the mirror, the version of herself with the hollow eyes and unnatural smile. But this wasn't a reflection anymore. It's real. The thought echoed in her mind, a cold realization that hit her like a punch to the gut. The figure shifted, slowly, almost languidly. Its head tilted, as if studying her, and Emily's heart raced even faster. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The figure slowly rose to its full height, towering over her, its thin, long limbs stretching unnaturally. Emily could hear the sharp, hollow sound of its breath, raspy and slow, like it hadn't breathed in years. "Why are you here?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "What do you want from me?" The figure's lips parted, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a smile, a twisted, cruel grin, before it spoke. The voice was her own, but distorted, hollow, as though coming from somewhere far, far away. "You're not meant to leave." The words sent a chill through Emily's body, and in that instant, the attic seemed to close in on her. The figure's hollow eyes never left her as it stepped closer, its long, slender fingers reaching out toward her. She took a step back, but it was too late. Before she could react, the figure was right in front of her, its cold hand reaching toward her chest, as if to claim her soul. "No!" Emily screamed, her hands flying up to protect herself, but the figure's grip was too strong, its touch ice-cold, numbing. And then everything went black. The first thing Emily noticed when she regained consciousness was the cold. It wasn't the kind of cold you could escape with a blanket or a coat. It was the kind of cold that sank into your bones, like the very air around you had turned to ice. She shivered violently, the chill making her teeth chatter as her senses slowly came back to her. Her body felt heavy, weighed down by the cold and the darkness surrounding her. Her head throbbed with a dull, aching pain. It took her a moment to realize she was no longer in the cabin, no longer in the attic. She blinked, trying to focus, and then her surroundings came into sharper view. The ground beneath her was damp, soft with moss and old leaves. She was lying on the forest floor, the canopy of trees above her blocking out most of the moonlight. The air was thick with the smell of earth and wet foliage, the scent almost suffocating in its intensity. The forest. She sat up quickly, panic surging in her chest as she realized where she was. How did I get here? The last thing she remembered was the figure in the attic, the cold hand on her chest, the dark, hollow eyes. Had she fainted? Had it all been some twisted nightmare? But the forest, it felt real. The dampness beneath her hands was real. The rustling of the trees was real. Everything was too vivid, too intense. There was no mistaking it. Emily's heart pounded as she pushed herself to her feet, stumbling slightly from the disorientation. She tried to steady herself, clutching at the nearest tree for support. Her breath was shallow, the panic rising again, but she had to focus. She couldn't stay in the woods forever. She needed to get out. She needed to find answers. She took a step forward, each movement slow and cautious as she surveyed her surroundings. The trees around her seemed to loom higher than usual, their trunks twisted and gnarled, as if they had been there for centuries. It was darker than she remembered the woods being. A thick fog hung in the air, rolling along the ground like a living thing, obscuring her vision. This is wrong, she thought, a chill creeping down her spine. This is not the same place. The forest was silent now. The usual sounds of night creatures, the rustling of small animals, the chirping of crickets, were absent. It was as if everything in the woods had gone still, holding its breath. Watching. A strange sense of unease washed over Emily. She felt eyes on her. Not the normal, innocent eyes of woodland creatures, but something darker. Something waiting. She took another step, this time moving more purposefully, the desire to escape pushing her forward. Her feet were heavy as they sank into the soft earth, each step taking more effort than the last. Her legs felt like lead, as if the forest itself was trying to keep her here, to slow her down. But Emily couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. The trees began to blur together as she walked deeper into the woods, their shapes twisting and warping in the fog, as if they were alive, growing, stretching, moving. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, the air thick with something oppressive. A low growl suddenly broke the silence, the sound cutting through the quiet like a knife. Emily froze. The growl wasn't from any animal she knew. It was deep, guttural, like something ancient and primal. Her blood ran cold. What is that? Her breath quickened, and her mind raced as she tried to place the source of the noise. She couldn't see anything in the thick fog, but the growl came again, this time much closer. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, like someone or something was following her. She spun around, heart pounding in her chest, but the forest behind her was empty. Still, silent. Then it came again. A low, rumbling growl, followed by the sound of something moving through the underbrush, faster now, closing the distance between them. I have to run. With a burst of adrenaline, Emily turned and bolted forward, her legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. The fog seemed to close in around her, the trees growing closer together, their branches twisting like hands reaching for her. The growl sounded again, this time accompanied by the unmistakable sound of breathing, ragged, uneven breaths that seemed to echo in the air, louder and louder. She stumbled, her foot catching on a root hidden beneath the leaves. She fell hard to the ground, her palms scraping against the rough earth. The air was knocked out of her chest, and for a moment, she just lay there, gasping for breath. But the growl was getting closer. And the breathing, it was closer now. With shaking hands, Emily pushed herself to her feet, heart racing, and forced herself to run again. Her legs were burning with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. She could feel it behind her, whatever it was. Its presence loomed in the air, suffocating, pressing in on her. Suddenly, she burst through the trees into a clearing. The fog lifted just slightly, the moonlight breaking through in patches, giving her just enough visibility to see. The clearing was vast and open, and at the far end, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. A cabin. Not again, she thought. No, not again. It was the same cabin. The same broken windows, the same dilapidated structure. How was it possible? She had left it. She had escaped. She had been running in the opposite direction. But here it was, standing in the clearing, waiting for her. Before she could think, before she could even process what was happening, she heard it again, the growl. But this time, it was closer than ever. With trembling hands, she turned toward the cabin, her feet moving on their own, almost as if she was being pulled. Something inside her knew she had no choice but to go inside. It was the only way to survive. The only way to escape. As she stumbled toward the door, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. And there, emerging from the fog, was the source of the growl, a massive, hulking creature, its body covered in dark, matted fur. Its eyes glowed in the dim light, a faint red hue that sent a jolt of terror through Emily's chest. Its mouth was open in a snarl, revealing rows of jagged teeth. And it was coming for her. Without another thought, she reached for the door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut behind her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Inside the cabin, she collapsed onto the floor, her back against the door, her body trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She couldn't move. She couldn't think. All she could do was wait. Wait for the inevitable. The creature was out there, waiting for her to make the wrong move. And it was only a matter of time before it found a way inside. The cabin was eerily silent as Emily huddled against the door, her breath shallow and ragged. The only sound was the pounding of her heart in her chest, a constant reminder that she was running out of time. The creature, whatever it was just outside, waiting, its presence heavy in the air, a shadow that threatened to devour her. She pressed her ear against the cold wood of the door, straining to hear any sound that would tell her the creature had given up and moved on. But there was nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that felt wrong. The kind of silence that made her skin crawl. Minutes passed, maybe hours, she couldn't tell, but Emily didn't dare move. The weight of the moment, the sense of impending doom, kept her frozen in place. She had to be strategic. She had to think. She couldn't survive out there in the woods with that thing hunting her. She had to outsmart it. But the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. Where had this creature come from? Why was it after her? Was it connected to the figure from the attic? The twisted version of herself that had haunted her thoughts ever since that night? Had it been waiting for her all along, lurking in the woods, in the shadows? Focus. Focus on getting out of here alive, she told herself, forcing her thoughts to sharpen. She turned her attention to the room around her. The cabin was old, its wooden beams groaning under the weight of years and neglect. Moonlight filtered through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The air smelled stale, as though it hadn't been disturbed in years, and the temperature had dropped significantly since she entered. She glanced around the room, looking for anything that could help her. Her eyes darted over the furniture, an old wooden table, a rusted stove in the corner, a few dusty chairs scattered about. Nothing useful. Nothing that could protect her from the creature outside. Then, her gaze landed on the far corner of the room, where a small door led to what looked like a cellar. The cellar. She frowned, remembering the strange feeling she had when she first came into the cabin. There had been something unsettling about that door. Something wrong, but it was her only option now. With a deep breath, she forced herself to stand, wincing as the stiffness in her limbs reminded her of the hours of fear and exhaustion she had already endured. She moved cautiously toward the cellar door, each step slow and deliberate. The sound of her footsteps was too loud in the otherwise silent room, echoing like a warning. When she reached the door, she hesitated. What if the cellar wasn't a safe place? What if it was a trap, just like the rest of this nightmare? But there was no other choice. The creature was out there, and the door to the cabin was her only barrier between her and whatever waited beyond. With trembling hands, Emily gripped the handle and turned. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. The air was damp and musty, carrying the scent of mildew and decay. She could barely make out the bottom of the stairs, but she didn't need to see it clearly. She just needed a place to hide. She stepped down, slowly, the wood groaning beneath her feet. Each step felt like it was taking her deeper into a place of no return. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The further she descended, the colder the air became. The darkness enveloped her, swallowing her whole. By the time she reached the bottom, her breath was visible in the air, a thin cloud of condensation that hung in front of her face like a ghost. Emily stood in the dark, trying to adjust her eyes, but the cellar seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were lined with shelves, some of them empty, others stacked with old jars and dusty boxes. A faint smell of rot lingered in the air, and she felt a cold draft that seemed to seep from the very stones beneath her feet. Her heart raced as she scanned the room, looking for any sign of danger, any sign that the creature had followed her down here. But all was still. Too still. She took a cautious step forward, then another, her hand brushing along the stone walls for balance. She was desperate to find something, anything, that could help her survive this. Anything that could give her a fighting chance. Then, she heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed up from the darkness below. It was softer than the growl she had heard in the woods, but just as chilling. It was coming from deeper within the cellar, from the farthest corner. Emily froze. It followed me down here. Her heart stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned, her feet moving before her mind could catch up, but the growl came again, closer this time. The sound vibrated through her chest, making her feel as though her very bones were shaking. Without thinking, she sprinted down the cellar corridor, her feet pounding against the cold stone floor. She had to get away from the creature. Had to find a way out. The growl echoed again, now directly behind her. She could hear the heavy, labored breathing, the sound of someone close on her heels. Emily risked a glance over her shoulder and saw it, a silhouette, tall and hunched, moving swiftly through the darkness, its glowing red eyes fixed on her. It was closer now. Too close. No, no, no. Her mind screamed. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't hide. Ahead of her, the corridor stretched on, leading to a small, narrow opening. She couldn't see where it went, but she didn't have a choice. She ran toward it, her lungs burning as she pushed herself faster. She reached the opening and squeezed through, her body scraping against the rough walls as she forced her way into the unknown. The space on the other side was tight, but it was a way out. She had to believe that. She had to. The creature growled again, louder this time, and she could feel its presence closing in. Emily's breath came in short, frantic bursts as she crawled through the narrow passage, praying it would lead her to safety. And then, as if by some miracle, she saw it. A faint light ahead. She pushed herself harder, faster, the tunnel narrowing, but the light grew closer, brighter. I can make it. I have to. Just as she reached the end of the passage, the growl echoed one last time, so close now that she could almost feel its hot breath on her neck. With one final push, Emily emerged into a small, dimly lit room. She stumbled forward, gasping for air, her chest heaving as she took in the surroundings. And there, in the center of the room, was something that made her blood run cold. A mirror. The same mirror from the attic. The one with the twisted reflection. But this time, there was something new. Her reflection wasn't alone. The figure stood beside her, smiling that same sinister smile. And in that moment, Emily realized she had never escaped. She was still trapped. Still trapped in this nightmare. And the creature was still hunting her. It was all connected. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, the beat echoing in her ears. The room seemed to close in around her as she stared at the mirror, her reflection now a distorted version of herself. The figure beside her, it, was a twisted, shadowed version of Emily, with a look of malice in its eyes. The same sinister smile stretched across its face, its gaze locked on hers. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. It felt as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room, leaving only suffocating silence. She took a step backward, her feet stumbling on the rough stone floor. But the mirror's reflection didn't move. The figure beside her stood frozen, its smile never faltering. Emily reached out a shaking hand, her fingers brushing against the cold glass. As soon as her skin made contact, the reflection shifted. The figure in the mirror leaned closer to her, its eyes burning with an intensity that made her blood run cold. It whispered something, a sound that was more of a hiss than words. The voice was hers, but wrong. Twisted. You never left. The words reverberated in her mind, like a mantra she couldn't escape. She recoiled, pulling her hand away from the glass, as though the contact had burned her. The whisper echoed in her ears, louder this time. You never left. What did it mean? Emily's mind raced as she backed away from the mirror, her eyes never leaving the reflection. She felt trapped, cornered. The mirror was her only escape, yet it felt like it was pulling her deeper into this nightmare, into something she couldn't fully comprehend. You are mine now, the figure in the mirror continued, its voice growing more insistent. The reflection reached out toward her, its hand coming through the glass, impossibly real, impossibly close. Emily stepped back in sheer panic. This can't be happening. This can't be real. Her breath hitched as the creature's growl reverberated through the room again, this time louder and more menacing. Her mind snapped back to the present. The thing in the woods, the thing that had been hunting her, it was still out there, still after her. She couldn't let it catch her. She couldn't let it drag her back into the abyss. But there was no way out. Not through the mirror. Not through the cellar. Not through the woods. Emily, the voice whispered, this time not from the mirror, but from all around her. The growl from the creature in the woods was blending with the voice, merging into a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from deep within her mind. It was like a lullaby, hypnotic, compelling. No, I can't listen to this. I won't. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, the voice, the creature's presence. But the growl wasn't just in her ears anymore. It was in her chest, in her heart. It was as if the creature itself was inside her, crawling through her veins, making her feel its rage, its hunger. She opened her eyes again, desperate to fight back, and saw something that made her freeze in her tracks. A crack had formed in the mirror, a jagged line running from the top to the bottom, splitting the reflection in two. The figure on the other side was gone. It's not gone. It's still here. Emily stumbled back, her pulse racing as she watched the crack slowly widen. Her reflection began to twist and distort, just like before, but this time, something was different. The figure was moving, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. And then Emily's breath caught in her throat. The reflection of herself, the version of her that had always stood in the mirror, wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, standing in the shadows of the reflection, was the creature. It was standing right behind her. Emily's heart stopped. She spun around, but there was nothing behind her, only the same dimly lit room, the same stone walls. But when she looked back at the mirror, there it was. The creature, its glowing red eyes piercing through the glass, its claws stretching out toward her. She ran. She didn't think. She just ran. Her legs burned as she dashed across the room, her footsteps pounding against the cold floor. The creature's growl echoed in her ears as she reached the door, throwing it open with all her strength. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from the mirror. Away from that thing. But when she stepped into the corridor, she was met with an all-consuming darkness. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air heavy with a presence she couldn't explain. The growl came again, this time louder than before. Closer. It's here. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She ran as fast as she could, each step echoing in the silence, her mind screaming at her to keep moving, to keep fighting. But the deeper she ran into the darkness, the more the world around her seemed to shift. The walls warped and twisted, the space stretching and contorting in ways that defied all logic. It was like the forest again. Like the cabin. Like she was back in the attic. Like everything was part of the same twisted nightmare, looping, repeating. And then she tripped. The ground gave way beneath her, and she fell, the air knocked from her lungs as she landed hard on the cold stone floor. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she felt as though she was floating in darkness, suspended between two worlds. The growl was right behind her now. The creature's presence was so close she could feel its breath against her skin. "I'm going to die here." Tears blurred her vision as she pushed herself up, trying to crawl forward. Her limbs felt numb, her strength fading with every second. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could hear was the growl louder now, as though it was inside her head, ripping through her thoughts. Suddenly, a voice cut through the madness. "Emily." It was soft, a whisper, but it was different from the creature's voice. This was human. Familiar. Emily froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned her head, desperately trying to locate the source of the voice. Emily. It was her mother's voice. She couldn't believe it. Her mother had been gone for so long, had disappeared years ago. But here it was. Her voice, calling her name, gentle and reassuring. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs unsteady, and looked around. There, standing at the end of the corridor, was a figure. A woman, bathed in a soft, ethereal light. It was her mother. But something wasn't right. The figure smiled, but it was the same twisted smile from the mirror. The same smile that had haunted Emily for so long. "You never left," the voice echoed again. "You're mine, Emily." And as the figure stepped closer, the world around her began to dissolve, the darkness swallowing her whole, pulling her back into the nightmare she could never escape. The creature's growl was the last thing Emily heard before everything went black. Darkness swallowed her whole. It was a suffocating silence, a void that consumed everything: the growl, her thoughts, her fears. Nothing existed except the oppressive stillness. But then, a light pierced through the blackness. It was faint at first, a glimmer at the edge of her consciousness, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the night. Emily's body jerked, and she gasped, sucking in air as though she had been drowning. She blinked, trying to clear the fog in her mind. She wasn't sure where she was. The last thing she remembered was the twisted figure of her mother, the creature's growl, and then nothing. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, like she was dragging them through a thick, invisible fog. The light grew stronger, and Emily felt warmth, something she hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. It was like stepping out of a nightmare into a dream. But it wasn't the same world she had known. As her eyes adjusted to the light, she realized she was no longer in the cellar, the woods, or even the cabin. The surroundings were calm, quiet. A forest, yes, but different. This wasn't the terrifying wilderness where she had been hunted. It was peaceful, serene, but something felt off. She wasn't alone. "You're awake," a voice said softly, breaking the silence. It was familiar, but distant, like a memory she couldn't quite place. Emily turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing before her was a woman, her long dark hair flowing like a river of ink. She wore a long, flowing dress that shimmered in the soft light, the fabric almost ethereal. Her features were striking, but there was something unnatural about her. The way her eyes glowed faintly, too bright, too knowing. She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. You're... Emily's voice trembled, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind was spinning, struggling to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, but it wasn't comforting. It was cryptic, like she held all the answers Emily had been searching for, answers that Emily was afraid to hear. "I am what you have been running from, Emily." The voice was soft, yet somehow impossibly loud, resonating in Emily's chest, making her heart skip a beat. I am the truth. Emily took a step back, her mind racing. No, this can't be real. You're not real. Her thoughts scrambled for any explanation, hallucination, dream, a trick. But her body didn't believe it. Her body felt too grounded, too aware of the presence in front of her. The woman's gaze softened, almost as if she were pitying Emily. I am you, and you are me. You cannot run from yourself any longer, Emily. A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine as she tried to comprehend the words. I am you, and you are me? Was this some kind of twisted illusion? Another version of the same creature that had hunted her? No, Emily shook her head, her voice breaking. I don't want this. I don't want to be you. The woman stepped closer, the soft light around her growing brighter, more blinding. That is the truth you have been running from all along, Emily. You have been running from yourself. Emily's knees buckled beneath her as she sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the weight of the words. What do you mean? Her voice was small, fragile. I don't understand. I don't understand any of this. The woman's expression softened, her features morphing into something tender yet haunting. She reached out a hand, and Emily flinched, pulling away instinctively. But the woman's voice was calm. You were never truly lost, Emily. You were always meant to be here. This is where you belong, this is who you are. The mirror showed you the way, but you couldn't face it. Now you are here, and you must face the truth. Emily's chest tightened as she looked at the woman, at herself. The realization hit her like a wave crashing over her, threatening to drown her. The mirror, the reflection, the twisted version of herself, the creature in the woods. It had all been one and the same. It had all been her, a part of her. A part she had never been able to accept, a part she had been too terrified to face. She gasped, the words barely forming on her lips. I am the creature? I've been running from myself. The woman nodded, her expression one of sorrowful understanding. Yes, Emily. The fear, the pain, the darkness inside you, that is what you have been running from. But it was never about the creature. It was about you, all along. The mirror showed you your own reflection, your own shadow, the part of yourself you were unwilling to accept. The creature was not something outside of you, Emily. It was a part of you, your fears, your regrets, your unresolved anger. And until you face it, you will never escape. Emily's world seemed to collapse in on itself as she sat there, her body shaking, her mind reeling. How could this be true? How could she have been running from herself all along? The woman knelt beside her, her voice gentle. The woods, the mirror, the cabin. They were all part of your journey, part of your reckoning. You have to confront the darkness inside you, or it will consume you. Emily closed her eyes, the weight of the words crushing her chest. The darkness inside me. The mirror had shown her the twisted reflection, but it wasn't just a reflection. It was her. All the things she had buried, the pain she had hidden away, the fears she had pushed down, it was all her. But there was a part of her that knew. Deep down, she knew that facing this darkness was the only way out. The only way to stop running. To stop hiding from who she truly was. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "How do I stop running? How do I face it?" The woman, herself, smiled, her eyes filled with compassion. By accepting it. By embracing all of who you are, even the parts that scare you the most. Only then can you be free. The light around them intensified, blinding Emily for a moment. When she opened her eyes again, the woman was gone. And Emily was alone. The silence was deafening, but this time, it wasn't suffocating. This time, it was peaceful. Emily stood, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. The fear, the confusion, the terror, it all melted away, leaving her with something new, acceptance. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt alive. Whole. And in the distance, she saw it. The cabin. The woods. But this time, there was no creature. No mirror. No more running. She was free. And she had finally found herself. The truth. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?